He had a 927-page financial disclosure this week. He's made himself several $billion. He's trading stocks like larger than a hedge fund. He's made more money in crypto than any publicly traded cryptocurrency company. Okay, just to tell you what he's done in the last 18 months. And so, I don't know, at some point, I think he's decided that people are numb to it. I think there's a lot of people that are really fed up with it. And if the Democrats could seize on that, they will have a tsunami come in 2026 November and 2028.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Amber Mack Show with a very special guest whom Jeff will reveal in just a minute. Plus, we'll chat about how children are adopting AI at a rate 3 times faster than adults, what MIT is saying about the math behind AI and productivity, and the staggering amount of money President Trump made from crypto this past year.
And speaking of Donald Trump, we're excited to share that one of his biggest critics is joining the show this week. Anthony Scaramucci is our guest today with the latest on how the U.S. Commander-in-Chief uses and abuses social media, what to expect in the upcoming midterm elections, and what the U.S. really thinks about Canada. But before we get to that conversation, let's jump into this week's headlines.
Headlines.
Well, the public pushback against AI, in combination with the extremely transactional nature of the White House under Donald Trump, has created some unusual situations. And the latest being reported by the Financial Times is that OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, has suggested that his company give 5% of its equity, which would currently amount to roughly $42 billion, to a U.S. sovereign wealth fund in order to, and I quote, secure good relations with the administration and address political blowback. Altman, being the extreme altruist that we all know he is, has of course suggested that all the other American AI firms should do the same.
Of course he has. Stranger still is that Altman's proposal is basically a watered-down version of what Senator Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed Democratic socialist, proposed in June. Under Sanders' American AI Sovereign Wealth Fund Act, all systemically important AI companies, which would include robotics, data centers, and other infrastructure as well, would be subject to a one-time 50% tax on their stock, with the caveat that companies that aren't exclusively AI be allowed to spin off the non-AI parts of their companies to avoid tax on those.
So those are some strange bedfellows, Bernie Sanders and Sam Altman, and this is all happening alongside the White House actively restricting certain AI models, as well as the upcoming initial public offerings by OpenAI and Anthropic, both of whom I'm sure would really like to avoid having to discuss regulatory uncertainty that would negatively impact their company's values before they go to IPO. But unfortunately, at least when it comes to maximizing AI stock values, and as Forbes reported recently, quote, something odd is happening in the tech world right now. The technology that was supposed to make human labor obsolete at this moment is more expensive than the humans it was meant to replace. Companies are laying off workers to fund the very AI tools that cost more than the workers they just let go of. The circular logic of it would be darkly comic if tens of thousands of livelihoods weren't caught in the middle.
I think that is the best quote I've ever seen to really sum up
good.
the times that we are in right now. And it's a great read and includes the fact that Uber spent all of what it budgeted for AI coding in 2026 in just the first 4 months of this year, with their COO and president saying that, and I'm quoting, AI token usage didn't seem to correlate directly with useful features shipped to users, end quote. As well as Microsoft asking some of its engineers to stop using AI coding assistants because the cost is just too high to justify. So I think that's right. It's cheaper to get humans at this point. In fact, an MIT study showed that for 77% of roles, it would make more economic sense to just use humans instead of leveraging AI automation. So, Jeff, I think we can take that as a score one for actual real people.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating, to see how this narrative has changed so fast. And the AI guys who are trying to sell us on a bunch of things are happy to change their story along the way. But But yeah, it is not really going how I think Sam Altman or any of those guys particularly hoped it would. And, some other tech heavyweights are starting to pile on the complaints as well, like Palantir's CEO claiming in a recent CNBC interview to channel the voice of the American business when he says, with respect to the costs of AI versus the productivity gains it achieves, that, quote, something has gone completely wrong. I'm telling you, in this country, at every single enterprise I deal with, these people are livid. They're like, I am paying for tokens that create no value. I'm going to get no value, and they're going to get my IP. And yeah, that is exactly the equation that's happening here. And I think he's got a right, even though it was a very weird interview, he's got a right to be complaining about this because this seems to exactly be the case.
Yeah, that is a very bizarre interview, but absolutely some of the points do resonate. Meanwhile, after Google earlier this year told Meta it wouldn't be giving the Facebook maker the Gemini AI capacity Meta so relies on, it seems that Meta's own AI advances, which were never really as impressive as its competitors, have slowed to a crawl, with rumors that Meta has reversed its decree that its employees should use as much AI as they can in their work. Meta, again, has really lost their way.
Oh, it's Mark Zuckerberg, right? As I've always said, the least deserving person to be up there. He doesn't know what's going on, basically. And in fact, like Meta just came out of nowhere to recently announce that it wants to now have a new business where it sells its excess AI compute capacity to external customers in an effort to bring in some more money. So yeah, that's not a good sign. Things are not going well for Zuckerberg and his crew, and I think they very much deserve that. And while this is happening, while the American AI companies are battling it out, competition overseas is heating up, with South Korea committing to almost $900 billion over the next decade to build AI data centers, robots, and chips. And even here in Canada, our Canadian sovereign AI compute strategy is also looking to build AI data centers that can leverage Canada's green energy infrastructures to deal with some of the downsides that are causing major pushback against data centers in the US. And I would love to see that happen. It certainly would be better for the environment. It's good for Canada. So that's great. But the investment levels here in Canada are nowhere near what they are in South Korea, and certainly not in the US. But it's easy to see that this AI game that was so heavily dominated by the Americans is at least starting to gain traction in other countries worldwide.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit later because we are going to talk about President Trump a couple of times on this episode, Jeff. But as you're saying this, I keep thinking of an article I read recently that said that President Trump is the best thing that could have happened for the green economy, for example, because of all the things that he's doing. He's actually driving not just industries but countries towards being more aggressive about building their own infrastructure and making the country stronger, even as he tries to dominate them. So it's having all of the reverse, I think, effects that he wanted it to have.
Yeah, which is kind of hilarious given what a great deal maker he thinks he is and all that sort of stuff. But this is if you believe in things like this, things happen for a reason. And the disaster of having Trump in the White House, it's waking the rest of the world up to the fact that, hey, we can't just lazily coast by on the coattails of the Americans. And I think that's doing good things for Canada. I think Carney's responding to that well. And other countries around the world are waking up to it too. So whether that's the military investments that are happening in Europe, so NATO can defend itself if the Americans aren't there, since Trump is so totally unreliable. It feels terrible. It looks terrible because the news coming out of the States can be just so depressing. But I think for the world as a whole, it is a net benefit to at least let's get this disaster out of the way as quickly as possible, and the rest of us prepare so that we can fight against anything like this that's going to happen in the future, instead of just having assumed that the States would be there to defend us all and help us all as time went on in perpetuity.
I mean, what interesting times we live in right now.
As the Chinese curse goes.
And speaking of global impacts of artificial intelligence, UNICEF has just completed a 10-country analysis that shows that children are adopting AI at a rate 3 times faster than the adults around them, and warning that rules that are supposed to protect kids online are really not keeping up, going on to say that we're currently engaged in a global experiment on our children. I think there are a lot of people who would agree with that. And I think are thinking more and more along those lines that we shouldn't be testing up this technology and mining data that belongs to our kids. Some of the more interesting stats reported by UNICEF include that about 10% of kids turn to AI for advice on things that worry them. Around a third of kids worry about AI scams and misinformation, and 25% of children feared having images or videos of themselves manipulated into sexually explicit deep fakes. So, not only are the kids using AI, I think they're probably more aware of some of the potential harms and misuses of this technology as well.
Yeah, and if you think about it in terms of the global experiment angle, think of when we were kids. Can you imagine being a little kid and being conscious of any kind of scam or any kind of anything like that, or worried in general? 1 out of 4 kids worried about having sexualized images and videos made of them. It's a really dark place to get to, and so I think it's great that the UNICEF is doing this kind of research, and I think they're right in that in warning that this is not an experiment that we want to have. And there's no end of AI news, but let's hop over to something else dear to the hearts of older techies. Speaking of when we were young, namely the slow elimination of physical digital media in our lives. I recently shared a great article on your social media channels there, Amber, that began with the quote, "Technologies don't usually die because consumers move on. They die because the inputs disappear." And I think that is just fantastic and a very interesting way to look at it, right? You just, once you lose the ability to charge something or plug it into something else, well, it doesn't matter what that thing can do anymore. And it looks like that's pretty much what's going to end up happening with physical game discs, which both Sony and Microsoft have made announcements about recently.
Let's start with Sony, who announced that as of January 2028, physical game disc production for all new games releasing on PlayStation consoles will be discontinued. It also looks like Microsoft will follow Sony's lead when it comes to Xbox game discs as well. But in Microsoft's case, it's worth mentioning the company is at least working on a new disc to digital feature that can help users digitize their physical game collections. So I think that is actually a good move in terms of what Microsoft is doing to try to make it compatible so that you can still use these products.
Yeah, it's just a shame that people like there's some old games that are just as good as new games. So it's great to see Microsoft doing that, especially since the Sony announcement comes alongside its plans to remove around 550 Studio Canal titles for British users from their digital libraries due to content licensing agreements expiring or something like that. And as people who have had to deal with this kind of thing and other media might be saying to themselves, of course, there doesn't seem to be any thought of Sony refunding or otherwise compensating those who have previously paid for the games that are now just going to disappear. So, it's one thing to be allowed to digitize your games. I hope Microsoft means that in a way that they're going to be there forever as long as you keep them stored, instead of being able to wipe them off your drive when some agreement changes with some company who bought the rights to something. But we've been seeing young people increasingly embrace retro tech, and I see that totally with your son Amber, who loves records and old analog cameras and all that sort of stuff, but he's far from alone. And I hope this kind of move spurs even more of that. I mean, I have a PS3 that I keep around just to play Blu-rays and other discs, including I've got some very cool surround sound music CDs that there's just no other way to play them, and it's not a format that you you can get that material in that format any other way that I've found, at least. I certainly have not seen a lot of surround sound music on the streaming channels. Um, so I really hope that we don't see the ability to play old media lost as we move through our these crazy times we're into the future, because there's a lot to be lost there.
There really is. I was just thinking about something actually while I'm here on Prince Edward Island because it's so beautiful. We do a lot of driving while we're here, much more so than Toronto. And I was thinking to myself, like, we've built so many beautiful, beautiful physical things. And then I think today in this AI revolution, one of the things that we've gotten so far away from is sort of enjoying experiences and physical media, even. We have a record player at our little beach house, which again, there's something about that physical experience and some of that old technology in our lives that I think keeps things really tactile. And we will miss out on a lot of that, especially with some of this technology
And
that you mentioned.
it makes it shareable in a different way, right? You can hand somebody something physical that you're like, hey, you want to borrow this CD or borrow this record or book or whatever else, and there's that interaction is has something special about it that is just not there when you send somebody a link to digital content, because there's a level of trust that, hey, I'm gonna give this physical media to you. I expect that you're going to take care of it instead of throwing it across the room and leaving it on the floor or something like that. So I think we lose more than just the media involved. We lose sort of an interaction and a relationship with one another that was, definitely a positive thing in my mind. And it may be a little bit nostalgic, but there was just something about being able to go through your friend's CDs and be like, oh, can I borrow this? And yeah, so hopefully that's not totally gone. Who knows what the kids will come up with? But yeah, I'm loving the fact that the retro tech thing has been going on so strong.
Yeah, I am loving that as well. I had this thought, and I think this leads us into our next story because I was thinking about Mark Zuckerberg, and I was thinking about the fact that he's built this platform in Facebook, and I was thinking if you could fly over places like Prince Edward Island, which is so again aesthetically beautiful, these amazing communities, incredible people, and you were able to sort of fly over and look into their homes and see the kind of slop and garbage they were spending their times consuming every single day. If Mark Zuckerberg ever wakes up in a different life and is able to see, I think the damage that he's done to our society, it would be a great awakening for him because it's
Yeah.
been a hot mess.
And you see people outside roam, even in the, it's beautiful summer days and lots to look at. And there's people who just sit around and stare into the window of their phone all the time. And it's no way to enjoy life. We were just talking about this in Georgetown, taking pictures of the sunset or trying to take a picture of the sunset. And it's like, there's almost no point in taking a picture of the sunset or a beautiful moon because it does not do it any kind of justice to what it looks like to our own eyes. And I think people need to be okay with the fact that they don't need to capture and share anything. Like, tell somebody about it face to face, like share those experiences with the people around you and the people you love. That's going to be just so much more useful than, oh my gosh, my sunset picture went viral. Who cares? And so
Yeah.
what did that do to your life? Probably not much. But yeah, so this is the dangers of technology, where it leads us to do things that take us out of sort of more human oriented interactions that I think are awfully important.
Absolutely. And if you're wondering what the connection is to Mark Zuckerberg, his company, of course, owns WhatsApp. And WhatsApp has just launched username reservations, which allow people to find you by a WhatsApp handle instead of your phone number, which a lot of people reasonably don't want to share. However, usernames have their own problems, and there are already concerns about how they'll be used in scams to impersonate other people, concerns that have regulators in India already worried, which incidentally, has more than half a billion users, so a massive number of people using WhatsApp in India, and that is WhatsApp's biggest market as well.
Yeah, and so it's that seems like a vaguely cool idea. I know I hate sharing my phone number because it's the one thing that I will respond to is texts and stuff like that because I can turn alerts for other things off, but I kind of need a last line of emergency contact as a parent, just like you do. Uh, and it's a bit of a hard one to reconcile with the WhatsApp because private WhatsApp handle usernames because privacy wise, you'd probably be well advised to use a handle that doesn't relate to your name, but also because Zuckerberg obviously owns Facebook and Instagram, they're trying to get you to use your Facebook or Instagram handle, which is certainly tempting to use just for findability or using your actual like birth name for findability. But I think people should be aware that if you don't have your settings right, that means that anyone in the world can contact you. So I just take care of how maybe older adults and younger users react to calls that come in if they've got their actual name, because I think there's going to be a ton of scams. And speaking of digital scams, it looks like X has been spreading malware through its sponsored ads with an ad that leads to a malicious domain posing as a popular Mac app. And this shows once again how automated ad approval systems are just too easily gamed, and how the companies that profit from selling these ads don't seem to care because it's not really costing them anything. And they, instead of having humans looking at this stuff, they're having AI look at it, and it's not working, as we can all see by the on X too. There's not even an easy way to report ads. Like I see ads all the time that are lead to links that are on X that lead to links that pose as CBC, and it's like Mark Carney says cryptocurrency is the new greatest thing, and you should click here to sign up. And there's not really a way to report it because again they don't seem to care.
Well, I think that leads us nicely into this next topic because it might not be that far fetched that the leader of a country would be promoting cryptocurrency. Also, we should say that when it comes to scams, Jeff, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Meta's scam empire, which you've covered in the past on the Other Mac. It's hugely disappointing and frustrating. And just to stick with that story about crypto, it looks like US President Donald Trump, who used to rail about how big a scam cryptocurrencies were before making huge moves to legitimize them when he resumed his presidency, has personally made more than $1 billion from cryptocurrency in just 2026 alone. So that is just a staggering amount of money.
And it didn't used to be a thing, right? Presidents didn't make money when they were in office. That's not supposed to be how it is. So it'd be great to say that, oh my gosh, that's so hard to believe, but nothing is hard to believe about the most crooked US president in history. And we're going to hear more about Trump, his crypto self-enrichment, how social media will affect upcoming U.S. elections, and lots more from none other, and I'm totally excited about this interview, Anthony Scaramucci, who was Trump's former White House communications director. That'll be after the break, so stick around. You're not going to want to miss it.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Anthony Scaramucci is an investor, lawyer, author, and podcaster, but he's probably best known for his short run as White House communications director under President Trump. These days, he's co-hosting The Rest is Politics US with Katty Kay from the BBC, a show that shares an insider's view of the White House and the role of the United States on the global scene. Amber spoke with Anthony this week about these topics and lots more. Here's their conversation.
Newsfeed.
Anthony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, happy 4th of July. Even though you're Canadian, I can say that, I guess, right? I mean, you guys stayed loyal to the crown.
I wanted to ask you, I know you're coming to Toronto in the fall as part of the Rest is Politics tour. This is a tour across the US, but you decided to make a stop in Canada. Why is that?
Well, I mean, this is probably, maybe it's a little bit too aggressive to say this, but I'll say it this way. We have a ton of fans in Canada that we're so grateful for, and specifically in Toronto. So we look at the data, obviously, and we see the where people are listening to the podcast. I'm like, all right, I got to go up to Toronto and thank these people. So that's the main reason, I guess. But the secondary reason is I love Toronto. My first job, when I got hired at Goldman Sachs, I was in the real estate department, and we got tasked with selling the Cadillac Fairview malls. And so, for the first 6 months of my career at Goldman Sachs, I lived in Toronto. I lived at the Four Seasons Hotel. I used to go over to Eaton Center to their offices, that commercial office building they have adjacent to the mall. And I worked there, and then I traveled the entire country. I'm one of the few Americans that's been to Regina, Saskatchewan. Okay. And it's hard to
Wow.
believe, okay, given the fact that I'm a New Yorker. But I've been up and down all those beautiful cities all across your beautiful country. But Toronto is a very special place for me. I used to eat at the Move-In Pick. I don't know if it's still there, but I do know that the Scaramucci restaurant is still there, and I used to eat there as well. I used to bring clients there because I thought that was fun because it was close enough to my last name.
I love that. And I've heard you talk about Canada quite a bit, especially recently. We, of course, have a relatively new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Recently, I heard you give some advice for European leaders where you said that they should pick up the phone and they should call Prime Minister Carney and make him their life coach. So, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, yeah, they need life coaching. Carney gets it. So, listen, the president is a certain beast. You have to understand his personality. It's a very complex one. But the worst thing you can do with him is be too fawning. People say, "Oh no, he wants to be fawned over." I don't see that. If anything, he wants to be pushed around a little bit. He respects toughness. He respects winning, and so somebody like Carney, I think, was brilliant. He didn't call President Trump after the electoral success, and I think that had the people in the White House like, well, I mean, I don't know if this is definitive. We could probably check it, but I would imagine Carney was the first or among the first prime ministers to get elected in Canada. They didn't have a conversation with the president of the United States. I just thought it was great on Carney. And so obviously when they eventually had the conversation, it was understood that he would be addressed as prime minister and it would be the sovereign nation of Canada. And so to me, I think Mark, Prime Minister Carney deserves a lot of respect for that. And I think it's a template for how these European leaders need to think about Trump. The UK government is turning now. Andy Burnham will likely be the prime minister there. Pick up the phone and call Prime Minister Carney. Get some life coaching. Okay, he could be an expensive life coach, but I would still recommend. I think he's worth the price.
And you probably know at this point that the sentiment in Canada has changed a lot. Canadians are hurt in terms of the relationship with the U.S. For many, many years. We've really viewed the U.S. as kind of our best friend, and things have changed a lot with President Trump. What would you say to Canadians in terms of the relationship right now? I mean, there's not much individuals can do. We have a great prime minister, but what should Canadians know about what you know about the Trump administration?
Well, I mean, first of all, it breaks my heart to hear that. I know what you're saying is actually factually correct because obviously I travel to Canada. I have a lot of Canadian friends, Canadian business partners. So it breaks my heart to say that. But I think I would say to people that this is not a sentiment in the United States that I'm hearing. This is a sentiment specific to Donald Trump. He has decided that he wants to be aggressive with our allies. He's decided that he wants to be antagonistic. We've had nothing but a peaceful and healthy, prosperous relationship. The Canadian people and the Americans are very similar in a lot of ways, or culturally slightly different. But I would just say to people, there's 2.5 years to go in this administration. The bellicosity of that rhetoric, I think, is singular. It's owned by President Trump. I don't think it's a sentiment that's shared by others. Now, JD Vance did give a aggressive speech at the Munich Security Conference in February of 2025. I think that's his true colors. but I see his ascent to the presidency is very unlikely for a number of different reasons. So, take those two guys out of the equation. I think generally American political leadership understands the benefits of our long-term relationship, and I would like to go back to something like that. It's like you broke up with your spouse and you're dating somebody that you don't like. You got to get back to your spouse. It's that sort of thing.
I think that's fair to say. Canadians want some stability in the relationships. That is absolutely true. And I do want to say that some of what rolls out in terms of the division and the anger, it takes place on social media. We are a show that talks about tech and politics as well. Wanted to talk a little bit about the Trump administration's use of social media. I know almost 10 years ago you had made a comment to the media where you said that Trump understands how to use social media to get his message out. Do you think that is continuing to help him, or is there any point where that will hurt him?
Well, this is, I guess, not the answer you want, but I'm going to give it to you. He doesn't care. Okay, so when I made that statement, Trump understood that whatever blockages he was getting from mainstream or industrial media, he could jump over them and go directly to people over Twitter. I also made the statement 2 years ago that Trump understands where the currents are. So if the Facebook campaign was the '08 and the 12 campaigns run by Barack Obama successfully, the Twitter campaign was 2016. 2024 became a podcast campaign. And the president understood that. He went on every podcast. He was super aggressive about it. Vice President Harris elected not to do that, and I think it did cost her because she did have her and her popularity was ramping, by the way. So I would just say he doesn't care anymore. So he has his Truth Social. He puts out blistering things. He puts out. I guess he had himself in a fighter plane. I don't know, taking a dump on a political adversary. I don't know. Does that make any sense? He was in a mankini with Prime Minister Netanyahu on the Gaza beach. We've got 800,000 people. I'm sorry, let me say that we have 80,000 people that died in Gaza as a result of the war. He's got himself on the beach with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So he does not care. I mean, I could give you 25 other things that he's doing. I mean, he has a rendition of himself on Orthodox Easter Sunday as Jesus. But he says, no, that wasn't me as Jesus. That was me as a doctor. I mean, come on. We know the guy's unwell. We know that he's got a bunch of willing sycophants around him that are surrounding him, allowing him this birth to do whatever he wants. But I would say today that he's failing on social media because his base is continuing to shrink. And he's also hurting the Republican Party. The registrations now in the Republican Party are way down. And so uh, we'll see what happens. But my prediction is he's going to really hurt the Republican Party coming into these midterms and into 2028.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the midterms through the lens of social media, podcasting, artificial intelligence. All of these, I think, are having an impact on the way that people vote. And then there is also this anxiety and anger among many groups of people in the U.S. Can you talk a little bit about the tone of things right now in terms of where they stand leading into the midterms?
Well, I think the Democrats have the edge. I think the Democrats are, uh, I mean, it's another terrible thing to say, but I think the best thing that Trump and the Republicans have going for them are the Democrats because they're so splintered. Somebody asked me in the UK, I was there last week. They said, well, who runs the Democratic Party? I said, well, I know who runs the Democratic Party. He's like, oh, thank God. Well, who is it? It's Donald J. Trump. He's the one that runs the Democratic Party because he's the cue ball at the end of the billiard table, and he figures out how to ignite them, and he figures out how to trigger them, and he slams himself into them, and they scatter everywhere. They would be so much better off if they could consolidate. My friend Stephen A. Smith, who's the ESPN commentator, also has a podcast on politics. We see the world very similarly. And he said something the other day that I'll repeat here, which I agree with. He's like, get it together, pick a leader and decide, even if you don't like the person and they don't fit your political fingerprint identically, but they're the most attractive candidate to win in America, get that candidate in place. So But I'll tell you this though, if they win in Maine, if Plattner wins in Maine and Tallarico wins in Texas, this is going to be a nightmare for President Trump because they will gear up on him in a way that I don't think he's fully expecting. Moreover, he had a 927-page financial disclosure this week. He's made himself several billion dollars. He's trading stocks like larger than a hedge fund. He's made more money in crypto than any publicly traded cryptocurrency company. Okay, just to tell you what he's done in the last 18 months. And so I don't know. At some point, I think he's decided that people are numb to it. But I think there's a lot of people that are really fed up with it. And if the Democrats could seize on that, they will have a tsunami come in 2026 November and 2028.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that news this week. Many people calling President Trump the crypto president. It is a grotesque amount of money, and there, like I said, is a rising sense of inequality. Not just a sense, but there is inequality. I saw you write online that said, "When you get anxiety, you get anger." Does this make the U.S. population more active, more inclined to vote, or does it lead to something even more disastrous among the society?
So that is such a great question, and it is so central to what's going on in America because I think it goes into different buckets. So, bucket number one is exactly what you said: people will get politically active. But the second bucket, and I think is the most concerning bucket, is that people get very apathetic. They look around and they say, "Oh my God! I mean, this is just so wildly corrupt. How could I possibly get ahead?" I'm not saying, look, I grew up in the '70s and '80s. Okay, I'm not saying that the politicians weren't corrupt. I got it, Richard Nixon, different politicians, but there was a feeling that at least there was some level of guardrails and there was some level of fairness. Now there's like a huge feeding funnel at the top where these guys are acting like kleptocrats. And Trump will say, because I know his personality, oh, well, look at what Hunter Biden did. He sold a painting for a ridiculous amount of money, or take a look at stock trading of Nancy Pelosi and things like that. But I think the second bucket is the one I'm the most worried about, where people are like, oh my God, I can't get ahead. The third bucket is the one that is probably the worst, I guess, for the political scheme for me, because that's the rise of democratic socialism in the country. And so, we have all different views of liberalism and left leaning policies and right leaning policies, but this country has been by and large a capitalist country and by and large a merit based country. But when people say, okay, well, it's not fair, and they're just going to take all this money, and by the way, we don't even know if Trump's paying taxes on this because he has tax immunity now. So, it's this type of stuff where people say, okay, let's put a Mondani in every single quarter of the United States. Now, maybe a lot of Canadians would like that, and I'm not saying he's done a bad job, by the way, Merritt Mondani. I live in New York, and I think he's generally done a good job. But what I don't want to have happen is we start capping people's upside. Because if you grow up in the middle class like I did, or working class family, and you see the spirit of America and the economic aspiration of America, you certainly don't want that. When Mondani is saying to his fellow citizens in New York City, put your air conditioning at 78 degrees, that's not America. I'm just giving everybody a heads up. America has the holy trinity of consumerism. This would be shower pressure, air conditioning, and ice cubes. Okay, that's America. So cool out with the 78-degree messaging. That's my point. I'm so worried about this that I always feel inclined to speak out about it. But Trump has done something to the country. He has gotten people revved up, and I will tell it to your Canadian friends that are listening. If you walked around on the street in America and you said, "Hey, President Trump is saying these derogatory things about Canada and Canadians. Do you feel the same way?" They would look at you like, "What? Are you crazy?" And I have a just one more quick story. I have a driver. My kids love the Disney cruise. Okay, so I'm not too shamed to admit that. Okay, I go on the Disney cruise every August. I have the same driver pick me up at the airport, and he said to me, my business is way down. The Canadians are not coming. He has sufficiently upset our friends in Canada, where a lot of them are finding other places to go besides their destinations like Florida and things like that. So So for me, I want all of that to end, and I want to rebuild that bridge.
I do want to say too, we've seen this here on a much smaller scale in Canada in terms of this return to the center, and I think that's what you see with Prime Minister Mark Carney. And so even though we have a party that would be similar in terms of Mamdani, the reality is that that is not what Canadians chose. They chose this sort of common sense return to the middle, and Prime Minister Carney represents that. And so I think it's a sensible path for the country to go, and most people are reassured in that.
So, I have a long relationship with the prime minister. We worked at Goldman Sachs together. When I was on the Romney economic team, I visited him at the Bank of England, and I was on the Trump economic team. I went to see him at the Bank of England back in 2016. And I had Prime Minister Carney on my podcast with Alistair Campbell before the election. So we did a pretty deep dive interview with him about what he wanted to do. And we could use a President Carney, to be honest. I'm a huge fan of the Prime Minister, and I want to see him be successful. And I want him to meet a comparable match here in America where we can rekindle that relationship.
Just a couple more questions for you. I wanted to ask about a column that I just read that you wrote on America at 250 years old, saying, "Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio?" Can you talk a little bit about America today and how you see the country potentially getting back on track?
Well, first off, thank you so much for bringing up that column. I was blown away at the reception of that column. I was really more of a, the Fortune guys asked me to write something. I was like, I'm going to write about Joe. Okay, so Joe DiMaggio was somebody that my uncles who served in the war looked up to. My dad was a little bit young, frankly, but my father's older brothers thought Joe DiMaggio was the man. He had such grace and elegance, but when you read his story, it's the classic immigrant story. And, his dad wanted him to be a fisherman out on the wharf in San Francisco, but nobody could hit a baseball or field center field better than Joe DiMaggio. And he had a break from his father. And this is just a metaphor about this country's immigrants where they come in working class families, and now the kids are trying to ascend in the country and to find their way. And I wanted to write a story about that because, it's a story of my family. My dad was a crane operator, excuse me, and he was like, "All right, you're going to college and you're going to go this and you're going to do that and you're going to move up the ladder of success in America." And I think what's happening in the country now is the leadership has become apathetic to the plight of these people. And these people used to be consistent voters for the Democratic Party. For some reason, the party moved away from them, started focusing on culture, issues of sexual orientation, issues of what they thought were economic fairness or racial equality and things like that, but not actually how to get a working class person into becoming an upper class person. Okay. And this is something that Lyndon Johnson, Jack Kennedy, Franklin Roosevelt worked on. And by the way, Trump hijacked those people. And so my essay is really about this is where we were. This is what we actually are about. This is our DNA as a country, and let's rethink what we're doing, and let's see if we can restore elements of that back into the country. But Joe DiMaggio, let me tell you, in an Italian American, and you got a lot of Italians in Toronto. Okay, read up on Joe DiMaggio. Okay, he was such a formal. I met him as an older man. I was in my 30s when I first met him. And by the way, you couldn't go to dinner with Joe if you didn't have a suit and tie on. He was such a formal, proper guy. And my point was, we got to get back to a little bit of that.
It's interesting as you speak because I'm thinking about your career, especially over the past decade. And when I look at you and I read your story, I see this incredible sense of reinvention. I've listened to podcasts you've done and conversations you've had where you've talked about the fact that some people in your position would have run off and hid away in Europe for a few years, but you've really faced things head on. Where does that sense of reinvention come from?
Well, I think, say Scott Galloway and I are really good friends, and he brought me to one of his live shows, and one of the audience members asked me, and I said, "Listen, my it's about survival more than anything else. I feel like when you have no choice, and I'll say this, and I'm speaking to the entrepreneurial sense of your viewers and listeners. When you feel that you have no choice other than to succeed, you will develop a better mousetrap. You will get up in the morning and think about another idea. You will look at a failure or a setback as temporary, And when I got blasted out of the White House, and I've told this story before, so forgive me for repeating it. And the guy was a phenomenal guy. I became very close friends with him. He was a crisis consultant, PR guy. And he basically said to me, okay, this is atrocious. I mean, this is an obliteration of your brand and your personality. You should leave the country. I mean, you're a wealthy enough guy to buy a villa in Italy. Why don't you leave the country, spend 5 years in Italy, come back and see me in 2022? I'm like, Howard, I'm not doing that. Give me Stephen Colbert's phone number. You got everybody's number in your phone, and let's start calling these people. I'm going to go talk to them. And I think it's a resonating message for people, particularly young people. You can have a setback. You can have a bomb go off in your career. You could have a relationship bust. You can do things can happen to you. And rather than being upset about it, nobody has an arc. I haven't yet to meet the person that has this arc of perfection where their life is going up in a 45-degree angle and there's no bumps in the road. Now they don't have craters like maybe some of the ones that I've created in my life, but my point is, it's okay to embrace it, and it's okay to understand that you can survive it if you persevere. So I appreciate you bringing it up, but I tell that story because let me tell you, you want to talk about having a bad week. I mean, a lot of things were going wrong for me in the week that I was in the White House, and so it was a rough period of time for me.
I wanted to ask one last question, and this is about your new book that is coming out in the fall. Because as you're speaking and you're talking about perseverance and reinvention, I'm thinking about the title of this book, All the Wrong Moves: How Three Catastrophic Decisions Led to the Rise of Trump. And my question is, how did you boil it down to just three? And without giving the book away, what are some of the highlights?
Well, I mean, I got it down to the three big ones, in my opinion. I always feel like, and Patty Kay always says this to me. I don't, what do you always say? Like, I got three things to say. And I always say, well, you know what? I don't think people can remember the fourth thing or the fifth thing. So I think if you say two things is not enough. It's sort of like the mama bear. It's like you have the baby bear, the mama bear, and the big papa bear. I feel like we think in threes. And so I said, okay, let me look at my 38-year career on Wall Street, my time in politics. What were some of the colossal mistakes that were made? And the messaging in the book is that this was not done on purpose. This is not a partisan book. This is sort of a reflection on both parties. And I started the book out by saying I got so much wrong. And I'll just tell you a quick story. I was in my office and there was a protest going on in Seattle. This was 1999. I had left Goldman Sachs. I had started my own hedge fund. There was a bull market, and so I was successful. I always tell people, don't confuse brains with the bull market. You start believing your own BS when you're doing well. And I was sitting there watching this protest. What was the protest about? It was workers going to Seattle to protest the addition of China into the World Trade Organization. And I start this book out by saying I was such a smug 35-year-old self-assured Wall Streeter. And I was like, what are these people doing? They're so wrong. This is going to be so good for the country and so good for corporate earnings and all this. I had the Wall Street cultural mantra in my brain. And man, did I get that wrong. Okay. And those people were right. And so it's a humbling book. It's about looking at decisions that were made. And I'll just briefly say what they were. Decision one, we let China into the World Trade Organization, and we didn't check their power as they were rising as an economic status in the global society. The second big decision is we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan without a tax increase. And guys, we actually cut taxes going into those wars. Bush cut the taxes in March, and we were at war in Afghanistan in October. It's the first time in our history that we went into a sizable war while cutting taxes. And so anyway, that led to this big deficit spiral, this big deficit imbalance. And I talk about that. And then the third thing is when we had the bailout, for some reason, we gave no money to the middle or lower middle class. We just gave all the money to the banks. And what did they do with it? They protected their people. They gave millions of dollars of bonuses out. It really made people soar. And we developed movements like Occupy Wall Street, the Tea Party movement, et cetera. And it led to ultimately this rise of populism. And so I just, provide some historical context and some economic data in the book. But then the last couple of chapters are hopeful about what we can do to correct it. But as you know, in life, you've got to at least understand what happened. If you're going in the wrong direction in life, understand what happened and then set up a plan to correct it and redirect your energies to make things better. And I think that's the whole message in the book.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of interviewing Margaret Atwood many years ago, and I asked her. I said, what's the problem with this younger generation? Why are they so upset about everything?" And she said, "They think that history started the day they were born," and it just made me laugh because I think there's so much we can learn from our past. Even to your point about the year 1999, I left Canada and moved to San Francisco to work in the tech industry. I mean, what a wild time it was. I was in my early 20s and a millionaire on paper, and then a year later I had nothing. So
I have empathy for that. I've been there. I've been there too. Trust me. I've had some roller coaster things go on. But Margaret Atwood. I've read a couple of her books. Obviously, I saw the television show. I find her writing to be human. I'll just leave you with that thought. It's human. It's complex. There's frailty. There's superiority. There's inferiority. There's so many things in her writing. And I always tell people, you got to read, guys. Get off social media. And if you read the fiction writers, they have the best sense for human nature. And when I read her stuff, it just reminds me about how frail we are. And by the way, another thing about her books, we need each other, guys. Okay. That's a big message from Margaret Atwood. We need each other. We got to pull together, particularly in tough times.
Thanks, Anthony and Amber. If you're in Toronto, Anthony is co-hosting a live event for his political podcast on October 4th this fall. So check that out. I'm sure you can find information about it online. But coming up next, we're going to talk about what's coming later for the Amber Mac Show this summer. So stick around.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. Taking a look at upcoming episodes, I'm going to take on prediction markets, including what you need to know and why they're dangerous for everyone, but especially dangerous for young men. I'll also be chatting about how Meta is getting in on the game and why that should scare us all. And if you've got thoughts about that topic or anything else, or things you'd like us to talk about, or comments on things that we've posted or shared or podcasted, just let us know online. You can find me at Jeff MacArthur everywhere, and Amber's at Amber Mac everywhere.
as Jeff mentioned, keep your comments and feedback coming, and we will feature the best of them on the show in the future. And if you missed our Canadian Tech Special last week, be sure to check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.